Hey, this is Khan, you're watching Ninja Pulls, and welcome to this comprehensive guide to Warden damage in the Elder Scrolls Online. The Warden was the first new class added to ESO in 2017, with the devs keen to show just what they could do with beautiful vis effects, sound design, and making something that really felt different. It's probably still the prettiest class, and even when it's not meta, Warden has plenty of fans. The nature theme, the frost damage, and of course, the bear, all unique features. Also, its main ability, Scorch, operates on a delay, similar to Sorcerer's Daedric Prey or Templar's Power of the Light, but because it pops twice and the effects are so big and loud, it's very good at making the Warden combat loop feel rhythmic, different, and satisfying. A cool twist on the Druid trope, Wardens also fit into the Elder Scrolls lore, tapping into the power of Ifrei the Forest God. There's a lot more on that and the user experience of different classes in this video. Definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it yet. Rotation videos are also coming, plus the rotations on ninjapulls.com, which are all strong and easy to learn, but right now, in this video, we're just unpacking the Warden's toolkit and looking at all of its components and how they work together. Mostly from a PvE perspective, because that's generally everyone's first experience of ESO. Fighting monsters is the default. Fighting players comes later. Let's start with the passives. Bond with nature. Free healing and more powerful than it looks. Not enough to keep you alive when you're under pressure. If you stack all the healing multipliers, you might get it up to 2k per tick, which isn't huge, but it has no cooldown, and when stacked with other soft heals, it can make a difference. So if you're considering using Dive as a spammable, remember this passive. Savage Beast. Every class except Sorcerer has an ulti-gen passive like this. The 8-second cooldown sadly does not line up well with Scorch, but you'll still trigger the ulti-gen every 12 seconds at least, and way more often if you're spamming Dive. Flourish. Free stamina and Magicka recovery, just for slotting any animal companion's ability. Sustain can be an issue for the Warden, so this helps, and for long fights we usually have the bear slotted on both bars anyway. Advanced Species. More free stats and very valuable. Critical damage is one of the most valuable combat stats, and it's not always easy to reach that cap of 125% outside of organized trial groups. So the fact that we can increase it just by slotting more abilities from this skill line can be pretty handy. Generally, for bosses, you'll already have Scorch and the Bear ultimate at the very least, which is already 8%, and you can bump that up to 12 or even 16 or 20% if need be. Accelerated Growth. Major Mending is super nice to have. Obviously, if the heals come from a non-green balance source like Vigor or Pale Order, this won't kick in. But if you're using Lotus Blossom, for example, this will trigger automatically. Nature's Gift. Sustain boost for healers, really. It only triggers if you heal an ally, not yourself, and again, only with green balance abilities. Emerald Moss. Again, this only increases healing done by this skill line, so not very helpful for damage dealers. Maturation. This is one of the reasons why Warden healers are still so popular in organized groups, boosting survivability across the board. Even if you don't have a single heal slotted, you'll still get 100% uptime on minor toughness just from the Bond with Nature passive. But as damage dealers, we'll appreciate this most in solo content or Infinite Archive. And thankfully, this one triggers from any heal, not just green balance stuff. Glacial Presence. This is a big one, and the reason frost damage builds work for the Warden, but not so much for other classes. The tooltip can easily be misunderstood, but all you really need to know is that 1. Apart from light attacks, every source of frost damage has a chance to apply the chilled status effect, which is a single instant tick of damage plus minor maim for 4 seconds. 2. It has no cooldown, so you can apply chilled multiple times per second. This is when it starts to become powerful. 3. Different sources of frost damage, glyphs, AoEs, direct damage, etc. have different chances to trigger chilled. You can check the specifics in the in-game help menu, by the way. We can raise that proc chance across the board by using the charge trait on our weapons, by putting points into the passive champion point Flawless Ritual or Battle Mastery for martial status effects, and by putting skill points into this, the Glacial Presence passive, which triples the proc chance for all of these. Obviously some things are unaffected, such as light attacks, which cannot trigger status effects, and things which are a guaranteed trigger, such as elemental susceptibility. That's the first part of the tooltip. Triple the number of chilled ticks. The second part makes those ticks hit harder. Don't worry about the number here, it scales to our offensive stats, so the final boost is much greater than it looks here. On other classes, chilled might tick for 8k damage in test conditions and if it crits, from a Necromancer using Boneyard for instance. Arcanists get 15% more from their Psychic Lesion passive, but Wardens can get over 16k per hit, again, in test conditions. The point is, our chilled ticks are much bigger and far more numerous, so investing in frost damage pays greater dividends than it does for other classes. This whole interaction has been through several iterations, but in its current form, it's a pretty nice passive. And my favourite part is that you don't have to focus on frost, it's totally optional. But it is something we should understand if we want to play Warden at a decent level. Frozen Armor. This is useful for tanks, PvP, and of course, solo content. There are plenty of other ways to get your armor up, but if we already have some Winter's Embrace abilities slotted, it can be handy to move them around so we get that extra armor where we need it. Icy Aura. Mostly a PvP thing. If you don't know what a snare is, it's just an effect which reduces your movement speed. This mitigates that effect slightly and is always active. You may occasionally notice the difference when tanking on a Warden, but probably not so much as a damage dealer. Piercing Cold. We'll always be dealing some frost damage, so this passive should also be active all the time. It used to apply only with a Frost Staff equipped, but that was changed in Update 43 to rein in Wardens in PvP. Now you have to deal frost damage to trigger it, and the effect is conditional on your health. So we only get that 8% damage boost if our max health is below 30k, which it will be on a damage dealer unless we're going for high arcs in Infinite Archive, in which case we probably want the extra mitigation anyway. Again, this passive will automatically take care of itself if we play the Warden right, but we've got to understand how it works. That's it. There's some interesting stuff in there, and I think there's an inventiveness here you don't see in the original base game class passives. For example, the way Bond with Nature heals you when an animal companion's ability ends, which then triggers the maturation passive, granting you minor toughness. So when you refresh your Netch for the first time, you'll see your health bar pop and expand. It's a smart way to do it, and even though we don't see the domino effect happening, it's cool to sense the class toolkit working in the background and creating little interactions like this. I always pick 4 key passives on the ninjapulse.com DPS guides, and for Warden, it's Piercing Cold, Glacial Presence, Savage Beast, and Advanced Species. All we need to remember is to stack and use our animal companions' abilities for critical damage, sustain, ulti-gen, free heals, and minor toughness. Always use at least some frost damage for that 8% DPS boost from Piercing Cold, and if we lean hard into frost damage, on a Magicka Warden for instance, we'll be rewarded with massive amounts of damage from the chilled status effect. But we don't have to go frosty if we don't want to. Next up, active abilities. Again, we're talking about damage, not PvP or support. Animal Companions. Feral Guardian. Warden is one of the few classes that tends to run class ultimates on both bars, because the Guardian is a pet like the Sorcerer's Scamp and must be double barred or will unsummon it every time we bar swap. That is a penalty for sure, but the single target damage is so good that we just don't care. It's not always super easy to measure an ultimate's exact value, but if we use the Mage's Guild ultimate in test conditions, we get about 6k DPS out of it on this class, which isn't bad, but the bear can do up to 17k DPS, plus 3 to 5k extra DPS from hemorrhaging if you use the Wild Guardian morph. So there's really no contest. Plus it gives us extra crit and ulti-gen thanks to our passives. Wild Guardian deals bleed damage and has a much higher chance to apply hemorrhaging, while the Eternal Guardian morph deals magic damage and has a more powerful execute. But both morphs are super strong below 25% anyway, so Eternal really isn't the one to use unless you're building strictly around magic damage or the bear keeps dying and you want that free resummon. That hemorrhaging status effect from the Wild Guardian morph is really strong, and remember that it stacks, so it becomes even more valuable if you've got other sources of bleed damage such as Trap, Carve, and Cutting Dive. The bear has 3 attacks, whichever morph you use: Bite, every 2 seconds, basically a single target light attack. Then Swipe, the AoE conal attack which happens every 12 seconds or so. This hits way harder and deals cleave damage. Then Savagery, which only happens when we reactivate the ult. This one hits super hard, capping out well over 200k, but again, it is single target only. That's the main drawback. There's no cleave here except the Swipe, and because it's a short, cheap ultimate, we won't get quite as much benefit from groups with big, coordinated burst phases, although it is fun to be able to spam the bear when Pillager's Prophet goes off. Dive, our class spammable. Both morphs are ranged. Cutting Dive costs stamina, deals bleed damage, and adds a 10-second dot, which is really strong, but which obviously makes the upfront hit a little bit weaker. So for spam heavy rotations, it's not necessarily the best choice. Screaming Cliff Racer costs Magicka, deals magic damage, and boosts your damage for 10 seconds, especially during off-balance phases. Both morphs also trigger off-balance if you're more than 7 meters away from your target. All these details are cool and very powerful if used correctly, they're just a bit complicated. Not everyone wants a spammable with conditions. Also, Magicka Wardens will often gravitate towards Destructive Reach with its Frost component, but both of these morphs can be very effective. Scorch. This is the Warden's core ability for damage, and I build my rotation almost entirely around this. Subterranean Assault is the morph we want because it's stronger and shorter. It costs stamina and deals poison damage and has 2 big hits, 3 seconds and 6 seconds after we cast it. So it gives our rotation a nice, strict 6-second rhythm, a bit like Templar or Sorcerer. The other morph, Deep Fissure, costs Magicka and makes a Magicka Warden slightly easier to put together from a sustain point of view, but the 9-second duration is quite long and awkward, and it sacrifices some damage potential in favour of that major and minor breach, which should usually be provided anyway. Still, if you're solo and you need those debuffs, keep this morph in mind. Swarm. Very strong class dot which applies minor vulnerability. This debuff has become quite easy to get, but it's still good to keep it up, especially in smaller groups. Fetcher Infection costs Magicka, deals magic damage, is single target only, and deals 60% more damage every second cast. Growing Swarm costs stamina, deals bleed damage, and does not get a damage boost, but does put a second, weaker dot on nearby targets. Fetcher is obviously the stronger morph, but you could go with Growing Swarm for sustain reasons, or if you need another source of hemorrhaging. Betty Netch. A cute little pet, an awesome sustain tool, an auto purge, major brutality and sorcery, and a 5% damage buff, except when that free dispel kicks in. The Netch does all these things quietly in the background. We keep them in mind when we're planning our loadout, but during gameplay we don't have to worry about it, just refresh it on cooldown. Blue Betty restores Magicka, while Bull Netch restores stamina. That's literally the only difference. It's not mandatory, and I know 5% damage doesn't sound like a lot, but think of it this way. If you're doing 100k DPS, a Netch, recast every 25 seconds, amounts to 125k damage per cast, which is very decent. Falcon Swiftness. Short speed boost, handy for running between trash balls, but it's also worth slotting passively. Supports might use Deceptive Predator for the minor evasion, while damage dealers use Bird of Prey for minor berserk. In theory, you already get minor berserk from Combat Prayer or maybe from Camouflaged Hunter or Banner Bearer, but uptimes are rarely perfect, and the less disciplined the group, the more you'll get out of Bird of Prey. Also remember that every animal companion's ability we slot boosts our critical damage, but it's not one of those which works on either bar. To get the crit damage and the minor berserk, you must be on the bar where this is slotted. Green Balance, Secluded Grove. We're almost certainly not going to use this as damage dealers. It's a pretty mad AoE heal though, and if you do need an oh shit button for solo content or Infinite Archive or something like that, you could go with Enchanted Forest for the ulti gain. Healing Thicket doesn't have that, but keeps healing even if you step out of it. Fungal Growth, a group burst heal for healers, not for damage dealers. Enchanted Growth is a source of minor intellect and endurance, which is worth knowing about, and Soothing Spores is the rare stamina heal, but neither morph is really for us. Healing Seed, same again, an AoE heal over time. Budding Seeds can be recast for a burst heal, while Corrupting Pollen debuffs enemy damage, healing, and shields. Both morphs also drop that harvest synergy. Living Vines. Often underrated, this ability can be pretty strong if you're solo and building for damage. It heals for as much as 3k whenever you take damage, and crucially it scales to your offensive stats and not your max health. As far as I know, that's true for all the healing in Green Balance, remember that. Leeching Vines puts minor lifesteal on enemies for even more soft heals, and Living Trellis gives you a final 7k or so burst heal when it ends. The vines can go to allies instead of you, and generally if you want this sort of thing, you'll just equip Pale Order, but it's worth knowing how this one works just in case. Lotus Flower. Similar to vines, but longer lasting, this adds a small self-heal to your light and heavy attacks. Green Lotus can heal up to 2 allies, while Lotus Blossom lasts for an entire minute, but only hits 1 target and heals for slightly less per tick. Both morphs provide Major Prophecy and Savagery, so between this and the Netch, you can get all your main damage buffs without needing them from potions. Not exactly strong healing, but when you only need to cast it once per minute, it does feel like free healing. Nature's Grasp. This pulls you to a friendly player, or their bear, or their companion, and heals them over time. I can't think of any reason to use this on a damage dealer except for the lols, or maybe to pull yourself to a specific location more easily. Bursting Vines is a burst heal and increases the ult gain. Nature's Embrace heals you as well as the target. Winter's Embrace, Sleet Storm. This is a burst ultimate and a seriously cool looking ability, pun intended. Permafrost has the strongest snare, but Northern Storm hits way harder and buffs our weapon and spell damage while it's running, so that's the one we'd go with. Still, it does not compete with the Guardian for single target damage, not even close. The ult damage is actually a little weaker than Shooting Star, but that damage buff makes it more powerful overall and gives us some really nice high peaks in damage, definitely higher than you'll get with the Bear, at least until we get to Execute and the Bear becomes supercharged. So if you have at least 3 targets throughout the fight, the overall damage from Northern Storm might start catching up with the Bear, but as a bursty ultimate it really shines in short, AoE fights like Trash Pulls, where everything dies before the damage buff wears off. So it's definitely not bad, but only worth using situationally and if you understand how it works. Frost Cloak. Every class has a unique source of Major Resolve, an important armor buff that we should always have unless we're doing very easy content. The unique thing about the Warden version is that it applies Major Resolve to everyone in your group. There isn't really anything else like this in the game. Scribed abilities tend to apply Minor Resolve, and abilities that do grant Major Resolve only affect one target at a time. There is the Mighty Glacier set, but that's an entire 5-piece, when a Warden can just press one button and get the same effect. This is another reason, alongside the minor toughness, why Warden supports are still so useful in group content. As damage dealers, we always want someone else to take care of this, but if you're not getting Major Resolve from another Warden in your group, you must know how to get it yourself. Supports will use the expansive morph with the larger radius, but as a damage dealer or in PvP, you might prefer Ice Fortress with the minor protection buff. Impaling Shards. This has one of the greatest sound effects in the whole of ESO, and is many players' favourite ability. It's also one of the strongest class AoEs in the game, once you factor in the chilled ticks. Gripping Shard scales to our max health, so we take the other morph, Winter's Revenge, which scales to our offensive stats and has a higher chance to proc chilled. It's also a guaranteed source of frost damage every second, making it super easy to keep up that piercing cold passive for the extra 8% damage. Take note that the AoE ticks 30% harder if it's cast with a destruction staff equipped. It doesn't matter if you swap to a bar without a staff, so long as it's cast with the staff equipped, that damage boost will apply to every single tick. However, because of the way bonuses and multipliers are applied in this game, the boost ends up more like 20% rather than 30%, at least in my testing. Obviously, the more targets there are standing in the AoE, the more difference that makes, but against a single target it's actually not that big a deal, so if you don't have room for Winter's Revenge on your Destro bar, or you don't even have a Destro staff at all, don't worry about it, it's not mandatory. Arctic Wind, a self-heal with a twist. Polar Wind is a guaranteed burst heal with an additional heal over time, but Arctic Blast only heals us if no enemies are within the 6 meter range. If an enemy is hit, we skip the heal and we get a big upfront hit of frost damage. And like Winter's Revenge, every tick of this ability has a higher chance than usual to apply chilled. Arctic Blast is stronger than you might realize. It follows you wherever you go, it'll hit everything around you, it isn't capped at 3 targets like the Dragonknight's Flames of Oblivion. Just stay within 6 meters and you're good. Also for the healing, it's good to remember that while Green Balance heals scale with our offensive stats, healing from Winter's Embrace abilities scale with max health, since it's the skill line with the most tanking focus. Crystallized Shield, another one we can ignore most of the time. If you're solo or duo and you know you'll be eating a lot of incoming projectiles, you can cast this preemptively to protect yourself. Only from projectiles though. Crystallized Slab is a bigger shield and automatically shoots back at the enemy, while Shimmering Shield generates ultimate when it gets hit. Frozen Gate. We can totally ignore this most of the time. Frozen Device is sometimes used by tanks. It's slower than other pulls, except when you know an enemy will spawn at a specific location, then it can be pre-placed to instantly yank them to you, faster than you could ever do it with a chain. Think of the portal in Cloud Rest, or the spawn points in Black Rose Prison. You can also do some very clever shit with it in Infinite Archive if you want. The Major Maim can also be very handy. The other morph, Frozen Retreat, doesn't apply Maim but lets your allies use it to teleport to you. Again, pretty niche. That's it. I've said many times that the Warden might be the best designed class in the game. The toolkit is just really interesting and smart, and great at rewarding players who engage and tinker with it. In terms of capability, it skews towards single target damage. Both Magicka and Stamina Wardens can pull excellent numbers, but there's also free cleave, thanks to Subterranean Assault, plus Winter's Revenge and Arctic Blast, which are AoEs and also apply chilled, turning that single target status effect into some juicy multi-target damage. Still, it does not have as much cleave as Necromancer, Arcanist or Dragonknight, and in the latest trial hard modes where you really want a nice high health pool, it is harder to sustain buy stat food on a Warden than it is on some other classes. Still, you can work around it, and I actually think Warden is underrated by the general player population at the moment. The class toolkit also contains a lot of healing, buffs and debuffs, which give you interesting options when playing solo or 2-player. But for pure damage focus, the rotation is dictated as usual by the way our class abilities work. We are definitely going to want Subterranean Assault, Winter's Revenge and Wild Guardian. Almost certainly Arctic Blast and Fetcher Infection as well, and the 5% extra damage from the Netch is a no-brainer, unless we don't need the sustain and really don't have space for it. All the usual backbar options are there, Maelstrom two-handed with Stampede, a Maelstrom Inferno with Blockade, or the Maelstrom or Master's Bow. But the two-handed is particularly attractive since it buffs our chilled ticks, sub-assault, the bear, and a lot of our damage in general. It also gives us access to Carve, which is amazing in long fights, plus it's generally easier to sustain than a destruction staff with blockade, but a staff or a bow can also work really well. For the spammable, Magicka Warden can go with Screaming Cliff Racer, especially if we're using the Eerie's Cry set from Infinite Archive. But a very popular option is Destructive Reach, paired with the Master's Ice Staff on the front bar, in which case we should probably grab Elemental Susceptibility as well. Stamina Warden can use Cutting Dive, of course, Rapid Strikes, Bloody Knife for maximum bleed stacking, or Silver Shards for more cleave. If we're using a dual-wield front bar, it's hard to pass up Blade Cloak. Either morph works, it kinda depends which resource you're struggling with most. That just leaves room for Barbed Trap. Move your animal companion's abilities around to get as much critical damage as you need. If you need Major Resolve, slot Ice Fortress. For self-heals, Lotus Blossom, Vigor. If you're missing armor debuffs, you can remorph Assault to Deep Fissure, slot Bird of Prey for Minor Berserk, and so on. That's currently how it stacks up. You don't have to follow what I'm saying here, the important thing is to tweak your setup depending on the group and the fight. You don't use one build for everything. ESO is a much more interesting game than that. Use everything and anything in your toolkit that can give you an edge. But as a basic starting point, these are the setups I currently have saved as defaults for my Magicka Warden. I like the Master's Ice Staff for bosses and a little bit of extra cleave, but actually the single target damage potential is a little higher with Eerie's Cry daggers on the front bar. Stamina Warden also has various options for boss and trash damage. These setups work for me in the groups that we tend to get in ninja pools for teaching trials, practice trials and progs, but the more organized the group, the more you can min-max. The main thing is to make sure you've got enough penetration and critical damage, and slot CPs like Backstabber or Force of Nature if you're falling short. For more info on gear, CPs and consumables, we've got all 14 damage classes on ninjapools.com, where you'll find all of this beautifully presented. And you're very welcome to join the guild Discord if you've got additional questions, a specific type of build you want to try, or if you just want tips from other Warden lovers. And with that, we are done with the last in this series of class videos. Thanks so much for all your fantastic feedback. Seriously, hearing that these videos have helped so many of you get a better handle on your class has been amazing for me. It's the whole reason we have this guild and this channel. So I really hope this last one is just as useful. Rotation videos are coming in the new year, where I will walk through the specific steps to easily break 100k, 120k, or even 130k in a way which actually translates to content. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything, and to remind YouTube that not everything has to be clickbait. If you want to support me and Ninja Pools more directly, you can become a YouTube member for exclusive video content every month, hang out with us on Twitch, or just like, sub, and share our videos. There are still so many players being told that DPS in ESO is super hard only for sweat lords and that they should just get Oakensol and lower their ambitions. That's utter rubbish, and I want those players to see guides like this which will encourage them instead. So please, send them here to us. Thanks again, you guys are the best. Remember to check the description for my other recent videos, the website, Twitch, and the Discord, where you can message me, Khan, anytime, or the other officers for tips and advice. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the next one.